Hello and welcome to Lifestyle by Design, helping you solve everyday challenges. I'm your host, Andrea Kelso. If you've seen our show before, then you know by now the Boston Marathon holds a special place in our hearts and is a favorite topic to discuss on this show. I'm very excited because tonight I am joined by Paul Clarice, author of the book Boston Marathon History by the Mile, and he is here to discuss his book and his knowledge of the Boston Marathon with us. Paul, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And I'm very excited to talk with you because you have a lot of experiences with the Boston Marathon. You've been a runner, a journalist, and an author. And so I'm wondering, in all of your experiences, what first got you interested in the marathon in the first place?
Well, I do love history, and being an athlete in school, I just started running 5Ks and 10Ks and things. And I finally, when I became a sports editor of a newspaper, one of the stories I would do would be other people who ran the Boston Marathon, and they would tell me all these great stories. And I hadn't run it yet, and after doing that for about 2 years, I'm like, I want to run this. So I ended up running it in 1990 was my first year. Yeah. And you don't remember half the things you do when you're running it. As you know, the first time, you're so focused. You're so focused on everything. And people kept, afterwards, how'd you do? And I loved it. But they kept saying, hey, did you see, the guy who's singing Neil Diamond tunes in Natick? Or did you see Coolidge Corner? It's really neat with the Art Deco. And I'm like, no, where was that? Because I'm so focused on running. So that was probably with the book. I wanted to get all these little landmarks and fun things along the way that, right. I mean, there's so much.
There's so much character to the course and to the people who cheer on the course. Yeah. I think one of the things that makes the Boston Marathon so special is that people joke, it's a 26.2-mile block party. Right. There is someone along the way, and they really go out all day and dress up and play music and get into it and have funny signs. Yeah. And there's such a crowd environment beyond just the people running. And I've both spectated and ran in the marathon, and I loved both. But you're absolutely right. There's times I think I blacked out.
Yeah, you can't
because
remember.
You don't remember. And I was fortunate enough I live in the city, so I trained a lot of the route.
Oh,
and so I know from my training runs what goes on, but I don't remember actually running half of it.
I know if they ask you, like, what do you remember the most? Well, the start, maybe I was nervous. The finish,
yeah.
Maybe halfway. I mean, it's like,
yeah.
And then you start settling down, and you go, oh, yeah, I remember a guy with a sign, or a kid with an orange slice.
Right.
Or Johnny Kelly statue, I finally found what that was. It starts to seep in, but yeah, when you're first running it, you're focused. Right. I got to survive this, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. It's true. So you've run in the marathon how many times now?
I ran Boston 23 times.
That's incredible. That is.
Yeah, 23 times. Yeah.
And you've participated in other ways. You covered it as a journalist, correct?
Right. I started out covering it as a sports editor, and so for about 30 years now, I've written for magazines, newspapers. I still do, and those are some of the stories that helped me as I was running. Because most of us when we run it, we're at the starting line and we're not going. I'm doing 26 miles. You break it down. Some people do in their head every 5K, or
right.
Their friends are in this town, or town lines or something. Everyone has little benchmarks, so you don't go with 26 miles. So I try to remember a lot of these little neat, okay, I'm entering Wellesley, the women, great. I got to look at
the Scream Tunnel.
Scream Tunnel. So all these little things, and you don't remember everything, but it's in your head to use,
right.
Especially if you're struggling.
Yeah.
Look at Meb Klefetsky. When he was struggling, he was saying that the crowd kept chanting USA, and you don't look for it as an elite athlete sometimes, an elite athlete, and even as an average runner necessarily, but when that comes up, like you say, on Heartbreak Hill, right. Where most people struggle, they'll yell at you to keep going.
Right.
And it seeps in and it helps you up. It's 26 miles of just
right.
support.
And it's very true. There are some really classic landmarks, and we'll go through that a little bit later, but it's sometimes funny the things as a runner you might grab onto are just some of those random moments. I remember for myself when I was running, I struggled a lot in the middle of the marathon, mile 13 through 20. I walked. It was a hot day. It was a hot marathon last year, and the heat really got to me. I drank too much Gatorade, so I learned my lesson there, unfortunately, the day of. And I remember there's just one woman standing on Heartbreak Hill towards the bottom. I had just turned at the fire station, and she was saying something along the lines of, like, you can do it, like, you've got to finish, you've gotten this far. And I don't know why there was that one woman, but it got me, and I was like, yes, I can do this. Thank you, one woman. She did it for me at that moment.
Especially there. that's about 17 miles.
Right, and you hit the wall.
So a lot of people will hit it.
Yeah.
If they hit it early, they're in a little trouble. But if you can manage it, you can really manage it. And actually, interesting in the book, Coach Bill Squires, who coached the Greater Boston Track Club, he coached Bill Rogers, Admiral Salazar, a lot of the winners, Greg Meyer. He knows the course inside and out. And he said, people forget this, on all the hills, there's a lot of flat in between each hill.
Yeah, especially that part of Newton.
Yeah, and people forget that, and especially as a runner, it's a nice respite. And he trained his athletes to, really push the hill, really push on the flat. Go the hill, push. But for the average runner, yeah, you struggle, and you go, and in your head you have this stigma of here are the hills. But if you remember, hey, I have a little flat in between each hill.
Right.
It does. Again, you're not thinking of all the hills at once.
Right.
Here's the first one.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And someone yelling at you, or with you, I should say. That helps push you. But that's the whole combination, as you said. It's the people, it's the landmarks, it's the course. All helps.
Right.
Sometimes you don't realize it. Like, you didn't expect someone to give you that boost.
Right.
And that's a big lure, I think, of Boston as well. It's just everything.
Yeah,
the whole combination.
It is, and because it's the whole course. And I ran another marathon where it was beautiful. It was in Providence. It was very scenic. You run along the water. You run around golf course, but you don't see people until the very end.
Yeah, and if we're used to Boston, you're right. You go to another marathon. Where's all the people?
Yeah, it's tough. Boston will spoil a runner.
It really does, because then even the organizers somewhere else go, we have a good amount of people, which on average they probably do.
Right.
But compared to Boston or New York,
right?
The real big ones, it's like, where's it?
Right. Yeah. No, I completely agree. And so, I think we talked about a couple of the landmarks, but maybe we can sort of walk through kind of from start to finish as you do in your book. And you've actually brought some pictures to share with us, so we have a visual aid, which I think is great because especially as a spectator, you're probably seeing one part of the course.
Yes.
Say you live out in Natick or Framingham, or you live downtown. And I think what's really unique about this course is that it's so different as you go through. You're really experiencing many different communities and many different stretches.
Each town is so proud of their portion.
Right.
And they dress up their portion, they landscape their portion.
Yeah.
And some have statues, some have signage, some have real nice gardening, and it's just. You're right. It's not so different that you're like, where am I now type of thing. But you go, oh, now I'm in this town. Oh, neat. And it gets a little flavor of that town. That town wants to show off.
Right.
Say, here's Natick. Here's Brookline. Here's Boston. Well, for a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It's a nice little flavor of the town. That's part of like a tour.
Right.
of the city and through the marathon.
Yeah.
It's nice to see that.
And it's funny, you actually don't spend very much time in Boston.
No, you're actually in Boston proper for about 1.5 miles.
Yeah.
Right before the Massachusetts Turnpike overpass. Yeah. Although they include Brookline and Brighton as part of Boston, but like in the book, it's good you mentioned that. I break it down because out-of-towners or people from out of state don't know Brookline or Brighton would be part of Boston. So I do break it down to let them know, you're in a mile here. Brookline's 2.25 miles.
Yeah.
Boston proper, right before the Mass Pike, Kenmore Square. I think it's like 1.10 miles.
Right.
In Boston itself. So it's good. It's funny you say that. Yeah, it's called the Boston Marathon, but I think that's the least amount. Of something.
It is. I always thought it was funny. I actually ran for the local Brookline team, and I remember for me the part that was most special was when I got to Cleveland Circle. That's the start of the Brookline portion, more or less. And there was a sign actually that says "You're in Brookline," and I had the Brookline shirt. Everyone was cheering, and all of a sudden I just felt like they're cheering for me.
That's nice.
And that was probably the most special part because that was the town I had been fundraising for. I ran as a charity runner. It was where I had done the majority of my training while I was preparing, and the end was phenomenal. Nothing compares to that, but running through Brookline was very special for me.
Brookline's tricky. It's a great portion of the marathon, but it's a very tricky one because you're done with the hills. And a lot of people forget, oh good, it's like less than 4 miles to go.
Right.
You turn onto Beacon, lovely area.
It's beautiful,
apartments.
Yeah.
But I joke in the book about it, the train's on the left side. Yeah. How many times do you see runners as you're running, they go in, they go, I can't do this anymore because it's train's right there.
Right.
And if you're in trouble, I'll take the train. So ignore the train. If you're running, ignore it. But you're right, the train's right there.
Yeah.
But the people are, Brookline I love because when you're running, it's like an echo. There's no spectators on the left side of the runners because of train. But on the right side, you have these 3 floors of windows, and people are yelling at you from the windows, some of the rooftops. They've been there since sometimes 8 or 9 in the morning with their barbecues and partying. But the support is good, and that's when you need it.
Right.
Brookline's really when you start, after the hills with BC and everything, Brookline, it's a tough, when you take a left onto Beacon, it's a straightaway basically to the Citgo sign, which never really gets any bigger, right, until you get there. It's like the small Citgo sign when you see it in the distance. But that's a tough stretch. The rolling hills, the Coolidge Corner area.
It's the most mental part of it,
It really is. You got to regroup. And the only thing that really helps you is say, I only have 2 miles or 3 miles, depending how close you get. But it's a great. I look forward to Brookline as a reward from the hills when I run it.
When I'm a spectator and I cheer, I actually will cheer just before that, just because of where I live and whatnot, right before Cleveland Circle, and it's an interesting part because you've passed the bottom of Heartbreak Hill, because after Heartbreak, I thought the worst part was you go straight down.
That's the worst for your legs, yeah.
And you have the BC kids cheering, which is great, but then it gets a little quiet in that area sometimes.
Yeah, through the cemetery before you get to the
So I'm right after the cemetery. Yep. And I think that's where you see a lot of the struggle begin.
It really is.
And I like to be there as a spectator because that's where I want to get my support, because I know like that was a struggle. And for me, turning on Beacon, it became a little bit easier from there.
You probably got a second wind probably for yourself being the local, and
exactly.
I'm more familiar with my area. Yeah. It's good to train over parts of it, because then in your head, when you get there, I did this last month. This was no problem.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, so why don't we skip, we kind of were working our way backwards, but let's go back to the beginning. So Boston Marathon starts 26.2 miles away from the city, out in a town called Hopkinton, for those who aren't familiar with it. And so I've got some pictures to share with you. If you're not from Boston, everyone gets excited the days leading up, and we start to see the day or so before these signs for the marathon, which are really fun. So we'll share that.
It really gets you wondering, because as you say, you go to other cities, and not that they don't want the runners there, but they don't embrace it enough that like Boston does. I mean, the month before, they actually have Bill Rogers, and this year, in 2015, they had Meb Keflezighi with him, on a little cherry picker scissor machine going up to unveil a banner in the city.
Right.
They had done that for years, and you see spectators and media covering it in the middle of a city about a month before the marathon.
Yeah.
You just don't see that in a lot of cities. And there's banners down the road. And each town, as you know, starts to get runners training caution signs.
Right.
Or you'll start to see some marathon good luck runners in windows. So a month out in March, which is rare for like a major city to embrace a marathon, Boston and all the towns and cities in the course have done that.
Well, it's interesting too. There's I learned this as a charity runner in my training. About 3 weeks out or so, there's a big run that almost all the charity runners do, and it's sort of an unofficial day, but everyone goes out to Hopkinton around the same time and runs the course. The first 21 or 2 miles, depending on where you're at with training, how much you want to do. Basically, you run to Heartbreak Hill.
Yeah.
And I was surprised how many people were cheering me on that day. I mean, it wasn't even the marathon, and there were a lot of people, And they set up their own tables with water, and they had tents, and they had music, and that was really special to me, because it made me be like, wow, it's not just the day. Like, everyone is so supportive of this. And I think I learned just the running community is a very supportive community. Here in Boston, I was joking earlier before the show, everyone in Boston is a runner. Yeah. So there's just that spirit of it.
And you see it then.
Yeah.
You know, especially with the winter from 2015, it was so bad.
Yeah.
But on most any winter, that run is usually like one of the first ones everyone can kind of get together. They've either done treadmills for a month or gyms, or they've been in their little neighborhoods trying to get a training run in.
Right.
And 3 weeks out, it's the last one for your big run.
Yeah.
So you get together. It also gets you used to running with people for someone who's new, who hasn't maybe, because in your training you should put like a race or two in just to get your head into the process. Doesn't have to be a marathon.
Well, there's so many people, and that if you're not used to that, that can be very. For me, it was very nerve-wracking. What are all these people doing?
Right.
And it kind of throws you off.
What am I doing? and stuff. And water stations.
Yep.
I remember one of the years I went through Natick around the 10-kilometer mark. And there was just 2 guys ahead of me talking, and when you're running, you're looking and talking. That's all you do. So I was listening to these 2 guys, and they were saying. One guy said, "This is where it happened." I'm going, "Oh, what is it? What is it?" And he said, "The 10K was actually the Framingham, Natick area," and he said, "He goes, yeah, because I went over to this water stop, And as I went over to get it, somebody ran in from my left side, knocked me down, and I broke my collarbone.
Oh, wow.
So you can be the best trained,
Yeah.
be fit, be a beautiful day, and something like that can happen. So since then, when I run and I go to a water stop, and I'm a big guy, it takes a little to knock me down, but you don't know. I mean, you know how vulnerable and weak you can get, and
Right.
just, you know, you're off balance sometimes. So when I go to a water stop, like if I go to the right, I have like a brace, you know, like my arm, like I'm in basketball or something. So if somebody touches it, because no one does it on purpose. So someone could go, oh, water, and they're not even thinking, or they got the headphones on or something, and they'll bump into my arm, like, oh, I'm sorry. But if I didn't do that, it's just to brace yourself. So all these
Right.
little things you pick up.
I know that's a great
You
tip
know,
because at
yeah.
the water stops, especially early on, get a little crazy because it's still
The first
dense
few are
and you don't
very
know,
tough.
like people just stop
Right.
and go. So I always like to go. I used to like to grab water at the very end.
Yeah, and there's two. People forget.
Yeah.
There's the first grouping on the right,
Yeah.
and then up a few more yards on the left to spread it out.
Oh yeah, and I
Yeah.
never would cross the street more or less to go to
Yeah, it's
water
dangerous.
because they do. And you're running 26.2 miles. Do you really want to create extra distance for
Yeah,
yourself?
that too.
by
Oh, you
running
zigzag?
across? Yeah.
Never zigzag.
Yeah.
Well, you say about starting in Hopkinton, Coach Squires always gave great advice. He said, try to start on the left side, because most people go to the right. Also, when you're running, and it just took this so difficult for me to do, he goes, you don't want to go out too fast, because it's downhill a little bit,
Yeah.
especially in Boston. He goes, try to go behind someone who's running just slow enough that you want to pass. And stay behind that person
Yeah.
to regulate you. It's a tough thing to do, but it slows you up just enough.
Right.
And then he said, and I hate carrying things with me, but he goes, carry like a water bottle
Right.
and stay like in the middle. And when you come across the first few water stops, drink your water. Don't
Right.
go to the water stations, because the first few are just, as you say, very hectic.
Right.
After about the fourth or fifth, it starts to spread out a little bit, put the water bottle away, then you can start going. So all these little tricks that, especially the first couple of times I did, I'm sure you did as well, you're learning.
Yeah.
You can't, again, I've done it 23 times, and I made mistakes each time. Trying to make the same one, then you're like, oh, nice. But yeah, you learn, and that's half the
Yeah.
fun. It's like surfers, you trying to catch the wave.
Right.
You really don't want to,
Right.
I think. You want to
Yeah.
keep going, so it's something like
It
that.
is a long experience.
Yeah.
We have a picture here. Just you can see it's at the start, before the race to start, everyone's preparing, and just the sheer density of the crowd.
That's-
Just to give you an idea, if you're watching, you haven't been to the start.
Yeah.
And that's when you start running. That's how dense the crowd really is.
That's Main Street in Hopkinton. That is a few years before it used to be a huge bottleneck, because people would fill the street from curb to curb, and it's thinnest right after the start line where you start to go down. So Dave McGilvery, when we became the race director, he was the technical director for a number of years. He measured and he found out where the thinnest part of the Main Street was, which I think is like 30-something feet. And then he put police barricade, those metal fences, from the thinnest point all the way down Main Street. So even though you may be farther down, there's no bottleneck that's going to be created. It's the same thing. So that photo was prior to that, and you can see people are just from curb to curb, and then you get to the thinnest part, and it's just
Right.
a bottleneck. So that was one
Yeah.
thing he solved. As a runner, it really helps him out to know, wait a second, we're creating a bottleneck needlessly. Let me find where it's the thinnest part,
Yeah.
and then go backwards. So that's why you see a lot of some part of the road near the curb, there's no people
Right.
because of the fencing. So it's a good, but yeah, those in the early years, all the older runners who look at that picture go, I remember that.
Yeah.
It's just people.
Well, it's interesting now too. When I ran last year, it was the first marathon after the bombing, and so security was
Right.
much higher.
Right.
And I had been to the start line the year before, and I remember there were corrals, but just sort of where the runners enter, just to
Right.
make sure that the runners who are entering the race are getting in the corral and not others. And when I went last year, when you go to the Boston Marathon, if you live downtown or near downtown, you actually go to the Commons, you hop on a bus, the bus takes you out to Hopkinton and drops you off at the high school.
Right.
And in the past, you would get dropped off, there's porta potties, you'd hang out, you hang on the field, and then you eventually make your way and
Right,
just walk
to
over,
Main
and it's
Street.
sort of unsupervised. Last year, from the high school to the start line, the entire way was corralled. And it was interesting. It was an interesting experience because basically once we got to the high school, that was it. You're just with the runners.
You're locked in.
You weren't really around spectators yet.
Right.
And so when they started announcing, you know, the waves, because there's so many people, they have multiple waves that go out. When they started announcing for your wave to go, we started this long walk. And it was a very interesting experience.
Yeah, that can be intimidating
towards
too.
the start line.
It's 7/10 of a mile from the athletes' village at the school to Main Street.
Right.
And you are walking thousands of people at a time.
Right.
In the old days, prior to 2013, it'd be fenced in, but you're right. They would say, okay, bib numbers this to this, start making your way, and you kind of walked up. Your friends are with you. Then they'd eventually get out of the fencing, but a little more loose. Then when you get to Main Street, you find your corral. They open up a rope to kind of put you in, pull the rope.
Right.
Then they drop the rope and
Right.
get everyone together, then you're off. But yeah, since the bombings, it's very secure because once you're in, once you've been checked and you're in the village, I don't want to recheck you. So then you're secured all the way. So that can be intimidating too. So all these, especially the first time, you know, marathoner, or if you've run Boston before 2013, you do it again.
Right.
There's a lot of different things. Some are subtle, but there are things like that. You gotta get in the village. You can't. You're right. You can get in and out of the village in the old days and just go. Like I would be in the village, then I'd go to the town common, and then go to the start from there. I don't think you can do that. You're either in one or the other, and that's where you're going to be. So.
It was an interesting experience. We've got another picture here, a sign. Welcome to Hopkinton. So this is sort of that area you were talking about. There's a really nice grassy, there's a rotunda.
Oh, right.
And yeah, this part of Hopkinton is really cute, actually. We went out for a couple point-to-point runs in our training, so I got to become a little familiar with it.
And that's the one where I have to mention the gentleman lying down there. This was a number of years ago, and the person lying down near the sign is Frank Shorter, who won the Olympic gold medal in 1972 and the silver in 1976. And he was commentating for Channel 5, I think, one of the stations, while he was running. He was mic'd. So when I saw him walk by, I'm like, I got to take this picture. This is one of our greatest marathoners. But you'll see, this is the morning of the race a number of years ago. You can see how, as you say, how loose the common is. This is probably an hour or two before the start. And people just walking back and forth. And I could go back to the village. So now I think once you're in one area, that's it. But it's still, even though they got those security measures, it's still conducive to enjoying the day, which is nice. Some things you just have to do, but I notice it's still very colorful, very, very exciting. You know, still.
We have a picture here of actually what I was talking about before with the field, and basically you're in there with just all the other runners, and yeah, it's funny. I rarely have been in an experience where I'm just surrounded by so many people. We're all just hanging out.
Because this is a village, and you can be there for 2-3 hours, depending if you get the first bus there or not.
Right.
And you can get there on your own.
Yes, you can.
But once you're in there, that's why they have the tents that you can see, the porta-johns, the staging there in the background. Near the American flag is calisthenics like every half hour. Music, just to kind of get you, you know.
It's interesting. I caught a later bus and we got stuck in a lot of traffic. So I was there long enough to use the restroom, and then I had to go. I spent almost no time. I was happy for it because I think I was ready. I mean, it's interesting because when you're a charity runner, you start a bit later, and I was in a later wave.
Oh, right.
When you're training, you run early. You know, you want to get out maybe 8 o'clock in the morning, get your run in, and then be off on your day. But when you run the marathon, you're starting between 10 and 11 in the morning, and that makes a difference because you still have to wake up. Yeah, you still have to wake up at like 6 or 7, get downtown, drive out to Hopkinton, do all your stuff.
Well, the early days, you could drive, way early days, you could drive up to the high school. I remember Catherine Switzer telling me when she went up with some of her teammates from Syracuse, in 1967, her coach would drive right up to the front door of the high school that morning, pick up the numbers, and then drive up to the start. Like Bill Rogers, oh yeah, I was already there. My brother dropped me off, and this. That would just remind me with Bobby Gibb, Roberta Gibb. She was the first woman to ever complete the marathon.
Right.
She did it 6 years before the Amateur Athletic Union allowed road races that they sanctioned to allow women. Like the BAA was just one of the many races that the AAU sanctioned. They were the governing body. So the women were not allowed to run prior to 1972 because the AAU did not allow races to do that. So she started, at that time the start line was on Hayden Row. the side street that goes onto Main Street, and she hit like a couple of bushes, a little gate area, right on Main, and she kind of knew her pace, so she waited till enough runners came in, and she jumped in, and she was afraid. She's like, I don't know if people are gonna, hate me or not. 2 years earlier, I should say, 1964-ish, 1965, she would run 20, 30 miles on her own in California. She's from Marblehead, California area. She would go back and forth. And she found out there was this big race in Boston. She goes, this is great. People communing with nature and they're running. I love this.
Yeah.
And she went to go to get an application. She wrote to Will Cloney, who's the race director. And Will Cloney wrote her back and said, women aren't allowed to run. And by the way, women can't run that distance. She's like, really? I just did 30. She told me, she goes, really, Paul? I just did 30 miles like yesterday, day before. So she was going to run in 65, but got injured.
Right.
So 1966, she showed up, and she was, again, she was afraid.
Right.
But all the runners loved it. All the men like, yeah, we don't care. Running is running.
Right.
And then in 1967, she did it again, and she was the first woman again. Catherine Switzer also ran that race, and that's the photographs of her with Jock Semple, who was the race official trying to take the bib number.
Right, they became infamous.
Because he was afraid, he could have handled it obviously much better, but as an official, he was afraid if Catherine finished, the AAU could disqualify everybody else. The contamination rule, as they say. Obviously, he could have handled it much better. But that's how that began, and in 1972, finally the AAU said, okay, women can run, and that's not too long ago.
Right.
And now the parity on some of these races, 50-50, 49-48 of men and women, it's great. It's an accepted, normal.
Yeah, I was shocked when I learned the story. I'm fortunate enough to grow up where I see myself running a marathon, and I do it, and I haven't had to experience those barriers, and so it was an interesting story for me to learn. It made it that much more special. It was also interesting when I ran last year. I was on the bus ride down, and I sat next to a woman who was also on her team. She was in her 50s, and so when she was my age, it was unusual for a woman to run, and she was a runner even then. And she said she never imagined she would run a marathon. That's just not something like women did. And here she was running. And so we had an interesting moment where we were comparing notes.
That's neat.
But so I want to just kind of quickly go through some of the middle because we're running low on time. But I don't want to dismiss the fact that there's a lot between Hopkinton and Brookline, Boston. So when you start at Hopkinton, you then go through Ashland. You get to Framingham. You get to Natick, and we've got some pictures for you here. The Framingham, mile 6, and there's some interesting landmarks. We've got this one here. I always thought was interesting.
This is Framingham, where the train station is.
Yep.
In 1 year, a train went over the road and cut the runners in half.
Oh,
About
really?
6 or 7 runners made it through. Freight train drove over the road, and all the other runners had to wait until the train passed, about a minute.
But
there's a number of statues you can see as you're running.
Yep.
I try to put as many pictures in the book as possible of the statues. Some people play the Rocky music.
Yeah.
You'll start to hear that.
Yeah, I heard a live band at one point out in that area.
The bands are all over the place. Again, the women in Wellesley, the students at BC, tremendous along the hill.
Yeah.
But I tried to put in as many different things that you can just read and enjoy.
Right.
Have it in your head somewhere, and then maybe if you see it, you go, oh, I want to see that.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I do encourage. There's some great pictures. We weren't able to share them all tonight, but I think just to wrap up, after the marathon, a lot of people get inspired by it. It's such an inspiring thing to see, and they think, I'm going to take up running, or I'm a runner, and I'm inspired to run a marathon. So what are some words of wisdom you have for folks who have those thoughts?
If you're just starting, start slow. Yeah. The body will adapt very quickly, but start with some walking half mile, run half mile, then increase maybe running to a mile. Once running about 2 miles is good for you, you can get it, then you can add big chunks. But just do it slow, let the body adjust to it, then you can add bigger things, and do a 5K. There's so many around here, and that'll really get your blood going for a competition too. Or if you don't want to, but you just get into that running,
right.
And then just go see where it goes from there.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is. I think starting is really the hardest part because it's a conditioning sport. So you have to build that foundation.
It doesn't take long. The body really adapts very quickly. So don't think you're doing anything wrong if you feel that cold breathing or like, oh, I have an ache and pain.
Right.
You know, unless it's like some broken bone, you'll go through it and it adapts so well. You'll pick it up very quickly.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And if you want to check out the book, Boston Marathon History by the Mile, we've got it with us here tonight. Thank you for joining us on our show, Lifestyle by Design. This show is presented as a part of Brookline Interactive Group's Thursday Night Live program. So you, as a viewer, could be me sitting here hosting your own show. We encourage you to check out the program Thursday Night Live and check out Brookline Interactive Group. You can find more information about the program. You can see this episode and other episodes of our show online by visiting brooklineinteractive.org or watching us on Channel 3. And until next time, I'm Andrea with Lifestyle by Design.